I think it's the music. You know, once you create something and you sit there and go, look what we've done.
Steven Tyler, the iconic singer of Aerosmith, built a 50-year career with his band on a persona of love and bluesy swagger. His flamboyant charisma and powerful voice make him one of rock's most beloved figures. However, the world of arena rock is fiercely competitive, and Tyler's legendary ego has fueled more than a few rivalries. Behind the charm was a sharp competitor who often dismissed bands that threatened Aerosmith's spotlight. Here are 6 bands that got under the frontman's skin. Number 1. Mötley Crüe. A clash of giant egos was bound to happen the second Mötley Crüe showed up on the music scene. They positioned themselves as the new kings of wild living, a title Aerosmith had held for years. This wasn't a friendly handover of power. It was a mean-spirited takeover. The whole thing was fueled by piles of substances, endless alcohol, and a deep, angry feeling. Steven Tyler, the famous Demon of Screamin', looked at Mötley Crüe and didn't see a band that was honoring him. He saw a silly, over-the-top, and frankly, more popular version of his own band's wild life.
You know, sort of lighting ourselves on fire and trying to beat ourselves every single tour.
The hatred was so obvious you could feel it, a toxic cloud that hung over the 1980s rock scene. The fight wasn't just about the music. It was about who was real and who was fake. Tyler and his guitarist Joe Perry felt that their own brush with death from addiction was a dark and serious reality. They saw Mötley Crüe's wild behavior as a planned fake show to get famous. The anger got very personal and was aired out in public through the books written by the band's outspoken members. In Mötley Crüe's famous book, The Dirt, bassist Nikki Sixx tells stories with a certain rock star pride, talking about a life of filth and addiction that made them stars. When Steven Tyler released his own book, Does the Noise in My Head Bother You?, he didn't pull any punches. He openly made fun of Sixx's stories, especially the ones in Sixx's other book, The Heroin Diaries. Tyler, who had his own famous and terrible fight with heroin, basically called Sixx a liar for exaggerating his problems to seem more dramatic. In one very angry radio interview, Tyler attacked Sixx, saying things like, "He's full of it," and questioning if Sixx's stories about almost dying were even true. Tyler was saying that Sixx was just making up a myth to sell books, which is a huge insult from one substance survivor to another. Nikki Sixx, who never backs down from a fight, hit back with everything he had. He went on his own radio show, 6 Sense, to rip into Tyler. He called Tyler a fucking clown, an old-timer, and made vicious fun of him for being a judge on the TV show American Idol. Sixx said it was a desperate move for money that ruined his rock legacy. He painted Tyler as a hypocrite who was just jealous that the Crüe was still seen as cool. The fight blew up into a public argument over who was more rock and roll, who did more substances, and who was more believable. But hating a copycat was one thing. It was another to be replaced by the band everyone called your younger brother. Number 2, Guns N' Roses.
To the headlining band and go on their schedule.
In what feels like a twisted joke, the band that was first celebrated as the next Aerosmith soon became one of Steven Tyler's most difficult and painful rivalries. When Guns N' Roses first came screaming out of Los Angeles with their album Appetite for Destruction, people immediately compared them to Aerosmith. It was impossible not to. A charming, wild, and often out-of-control frontman with a high-pitched scream? Yes, a quiet, moody lead guitarist in a top hat who was a genius at playing sleazy, bluesy guitar licks? Yes, a rhythm section powered by substances, alcohol, and a bad attitude? Yes, Axl Rose and Slash were the new Tyler and Perry. For a little while, Aerosmith acted like proud older brothers, even taking the new band on tour with them. But that feeling of respect soon turned into a nasty fight as GNR became famous with shocking speed, and it looked like they might push Aerosmith out of the spotlight for good. The drama that happened backstage on their tours together is now a famous story.
And so, as a rock band, I just think we've gotten better because we've been playing together for so long, or just playing in general for so long.
At first, Tyler and Perry, who had recently gotten sober, tried to act like mentors to the younger band. They warned them about the dangers of the rock and roll lifestyle that they knew all about. One well-known story is about Tyler confronting the members of GNR about their serious substance use, telling them straight up, "You're gonna piss it all away." This fatherly advice was not appreciated. The members of Guns N' Roses, who were deep in their own substance problems, didn't see Aerosmith as wise survivors. They saw them as washed-up old guys who weren't cool anymore. They openly made fun of Aerosmith for being sober, saying it was a betrayal of what rock and roll was all about. The bad feelings got worse and worse until Axl Rose started to insult his heroes in public. Axl, in his usual aggressive way, began making rude comments in interviews and even on stage. The biggest insult came in the GNR song "Get in the Ring," where Axl calls out reporters who made negative comments. But the anger was also aimed at the band he was always compared to. The message was clear. GNR was the real thing now, and Aerosmith was old news. The relationship changed from a friendly one to a bitter, silent competition. Steven Tyler had fought his way back from rock bottom with his huge comeback albums Permanent Vacation and Pump. Now, he was being told he was no longer important by the very band that was following in his footsteps.
Taking the time to listen to the record and stuff, we're getting calls from a lot of major bands.
As Guns N' Roses became the most dangerous band in the world, Tyler had to watch as the creation he helped encourage tried to destroy him. It was a painful lesson that in the world of rock, your biggest fans can turn into your worst enemies. The betrayal by his rock and roll sons was painful, but another band angered him for a completely different reason. They were a cartoon. The rock and roll throne is always up for grabs. If you live for the drama of these legendary battles for the top, hit subscribe for more backstage stories. Number 3, Kiss.
In the beginning, we'd say, do we really want to play that? And you have these people on stage, the lead singer.
For a frontman like Steven Tyler, who was obsessed with image and a raw, sensual kind of energy, the rise of Kiss was a unique and infuriating problem. This wasn't a rivalry about sounding the same or having a shared past. It was a major clash over what rock and roll should even be. Tyler's whole identity was built on seeming cool without trying, a style soaked in the blues. He was the barefoot rock shaman with scarves hanging from his microphone, full of wild energy. Kiss, on the other hand, was a carefully planned, fire-breathing, blood-spitting stage show. In Tyler's opinion, Kiss wasn't a real rock band. They were a business plan wearing face paint, a theater show pretending to be a rock band. His hatred came from a strong belief that Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were taking the soul out of rock and roll and replacing it with a fake, empty show. The bad feelings were often stirred up by Gene Simmons himself. His loud, business-first attitude was the exact opposite of Tyler's art-first, or maybe party-first, way of life. Simmons has never been quiet about his opinions, and he often put down bands like Aerosmith for being unprofessional and disorganized because of their famous substance problems. In one interview, Simmons said that if Kiss had done as many substances and drank as much as Aerosmith, they would have jumped off a roof. He presented Kiss's self-control and sober lifestyle, at least in the beginning, as a sign that they were better, suggesting that Aerosmith's best music was only possible because of the chaos that almost ruined them For Tyler, this was a huge insult. It wasn't just a critique of his life. It was a dismissal of the very pain and struggle that he believed made his music great. Tyler saw Simmons as a cold businessman who just didn't understand. He saw a man who treated music like a product and fans like customers, instead of treating rock as a powerful, shared experience. The scandals around the two bands only made their differences clearer. Aerosmith's scandals were messy and real, caused by human weakness, substance busts, fights within the band, and near-death moments. But Kiss's controversies often felt like planned publicity stunts. The rumors about Gene Simmons having a cow's tongue surgically attached, the comic books printed with the band's real blood, the endless merchandise. It all seemed deeply fake to the Aerosmith camp. Tyler reportedly laughed at the costumes and the huge platform boots, seeing them as props to hide the fact that they weren't a genuinely dangerous band. There was a famous story from the late 70s when both bands were staying at the same hotel. While he hated the band in makeup, his biggest stage rivals were a wild bunch from California who wanted to party even harder. Number 4, Van Halen.
Doing something like that? Yeah, well, we were all going to different schools and living in generally the same area.
In the cutthroat arena of the 1970s and 80s American rock, no rivalry was more explosive than the one between Aerosmith and Van Halen. This was a war fought on stage, a battle of two bands with completely different styles, but the same goal: to be the biggest, loudest, and baddest party band in the world. Steven Tyler, the bluesy, swaggering poet of grit, found his polar opposite in David Lee Roth, Van Halen's high-kicking, spandex-clad circus master. The hatred wasn't just about music. It was a primal competition between two tribes of rock gods. Aerosmith's power came from soulful, dirty grooves, while Van Halen's came from Eddie Van Halen's revolutionary, almost athletic guitar fireworks. For Tyler, Van Halen's sound, while impressive, lacked the heart and soul he valued. He saw their incredible technical skill as a kind of flashy trick, a spectacle that overshadowed real feeling. The most legendary showdown between these two titans happened at the Texas Jam Festival in 1978.
You know, I mean, really, seriously, where do ideas come from? You know, they're just given. For unlawful carnal knowledge, I added.
Aerosmith was the headliner, the established kings. Van Halen was the hungry, up-and-coming support act, with a massive hit debut album. The scandal began backstage with a childish but intense argument over a bottle of Jack Daniels and, of all things, a roll of gaffer tape. But the real fight was about who could command the stage. Van Halen, knowing this was their chance to prove themselves, unleashed a performance of such high-octane energy that it left the crowd breathless. David Lee Roth was a blur of karate kicks and sensual bravado, and Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing sounded like it was from another planet. They were loud, they were tight, and they were trying to blow the headliners off the stage. When it was Aerosmith's turn to play, they were already on edge. The story goes that they were furious and felt disrespected. Their own performance was plagued with problems. They were deep in their substance-fueled Toxic Twins phase, and their set was sloppy and disjointed. Tyler reportedly fell off the stage at one point. Compared to Van Halen's electrifying set, Aerosmith looked tired and past their prime. The press and the fans took notice, and many declared that Van Halen had won the day. This was a massive humiliation for Tyler. It wasn't just a bad gig, it was a public dethroning.
What has the reaction been like towards you? You scared the birds away!
For years afterward, a bitter resentment lingered. Tyler saw Van Halen's frontman, David Lee Roth, as a caricature of a rock star, all flash and no substance. He couldn't stand Roth's jokey, almost cartoonish persona, which stood in stark contrast to his own self-image as a tortured, soulful poet. The competition extended to their lifestyles. Fighting with rivals was part of the game, but his history with one young band was far darker and more shameful. From cartoon showmen to stage rivals, Tyler battled them all. If you love exploring these epic clashes of rock and roll ego, smash that subscribe button now. Number 5. The Runaways. One of the darkest and most troubling stories in Steven Tyler's past doesn't involve a rival, but a band he was meant to help. Before they became punk rock legends, the Runaways were a group of teenage girls with real talent and huge ambitions. In 1976, Steven Tyler and Joe Perry got involved in producing some of their first recordings, but this relationship was not helpful or supportive. It was a dark and ugly story of them being used, a perfect example of the dangerous and predatory rock scene of the 1970s.
You shouldn't be doing this. It didn't enter my mind. The Runaways were rebellious.
It likely left Tyler with a deep, guilt-ridden anger for the project he helped ruin. The hatred in this case wasn't from competition, but from a messy and uncomfortable past. The recording sessions were complete chaos, powered by the wild behavior of the Aerosmith camp. According to the memoir of Runaways singer Cherie Currie, Neon Angel, the studio was anything but a professional workplace. Instead of getting guidance and help with their music, the Runaways were thrown into a non-stop party where substances were everywhere, and normal rules of behavior did not exist. Tyler and Perry, during the peak of their Toxic Twins days, were more interested in their own partying than in helping the band. The scandal is about the totally unfair situation. You had two of the biggest rock stars in the world in charge of a group of underage girls. Some were only 16 years old. They created an environment that was unprofessional and, even worse, dangerous and exploitative. The details from these sessions are disturbing. There are stories of Tyler and Perry being so high or drunk that they could barely work, offering the young women substances and acting in completely inappropriate ways. The focus was not on the music, but on the party. For the young members of the Runaways, who looked up to Aerosmith as heroes, the experience was a huge letdown. This wasn't the creative partnership they dreamed of. It was a look into the ugliest side of being a rock star. The music that came out of these sessions was mostly unusable, which shows just how dysfunctional the whole thing was. Tyler's later anger or dismissal of the band can be seen as a way of defending himself. It is much easier to call the Runaways a gimmick, or to put down their talent, than to face the fact that he was part of a toxic and harmful situation. He may have wanted to forget his past with those teenagers, but he couldn't ignore the future, which arrived looking to destroy everything he had built. 6. Nirvana. When the raw, simple, and very angry sound of Nirvana exploded onto the music scene in 1991, it was more than just a change in music. It was a revolution that declared war on everything Steven Tyler and his generation of rock stars stood for. The grunge movement, with its flannel shirts and anti-fame attitude led by Kurt Cobain, was the complete opposite of the flashy, party-heavy, and glamorous world of Aerosmith. For Tyler, Nirvana wasn't just a band he didn't like. They were the best of his entire era. His hatred was like that of a king watching an enemy army tear down the walls of his castle, and he was not going to let it happen without a fight. The core of the Bad Blood was about their different ideas of what rock music should be. Aerosmith, especially after their big comeback in the 80s, had mastered the art of the big rock show. They had expensive music videos, complicated stage setups, power ballads written for them by professional songwriters, and a frontman who loved being famous.
Getting on stage and playing to the people You know, really.
Kind of like the Bette Midler and the Rose vibe.
Yeah.
You know how you can just relate with the audience.
You connect. There's definitely this spiritual.
Like, see.
Kurt Cobain and Nirvana found all of this disgusting. Cobain openly hated the cock rock of the 1980s, seeing it as overblown, disrespectful to women, and having no creativity. In his interviews, he attacked the very bands that were huge in the decade before him. While he might not have mentioned Aerosmith by name as often as others, they were the prime example of the scene he was trying to tear down. Nirvana's entire style, the secondhand clothes, the broken instruments, the raw and often messy live shows, was a direct and aggressive rejection of the perfect, over-the-top style of bands like Aerosmith. Steven Tyler did not accept this attack on his world quietly. In interviews throughout the 90s, you can feel his complete confusion and anger towards the grunge movement. He could not understand why a frontman who seemed to hate being a rock star was so popular. Why would anyone with so much talent and fame be so unhappy?
Learn to play pool real well.
Yeah, learn to play pool, hustle on the street, learn to play cards.
To Tyler, whose whole life was a performance of joy and wildness, Cobain's public pain and anti-rock star attitude seemed like he was throwing away the amazing gift he had been given. There's a famous story, which may or may not be true, of Tyler watching the Smells Like Teen Spirit video for the first time and being totally confused, supposedly saying something like, "What is this? They look like they don't even want to be here." He criticized the music for being too simple, for not being technically skilled, and for being so negative. To a showman whose music was based in the blues, the jarring chords and screamed personal lyrics of Nirvana were like a foreign language. The real scandal was the complete takeover of the rock world. For 10 years, Aerosmith had been on top. All of a sudden, they were called dinosaur rock. Record companies rushed to sign bands that sounded like Nirvana, and the slick party rock that Aerosmith was known for was suddenly seen as uncool and embarrassing. His disdain for these bands was as legendary as his high notes, a testament to the ego and passion that fuel the world of rock and roll. Were his rivalries justified or just jealousy? Tell us what you think. Like and subscribe for more.